to the person who I had the honor to serve with, the President of the United States, President George Bush.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. I think you're going to find this to be a really interesting discussion about how federal, state, and local authorities are working hard to prevent a terrorist attack. That's what we're here to talk about. And why it's important for those of us in positions of authority to give federal, state, and local authorities all the tools necessary to do the job we expect of them. That's what we're here to talk about. But I got some things I want to say before we start talking about it. First, I am glad to be at the home of the mighty Buffalo Bills. I traveled today with Congressman Quinn and Congressman Reynolds, two fine members of the United States Congress from this area, who assured me this is the year. I want to thank Jack and Tom for coming today. Thank you for your strong leadership. Thanks for caring a lot about the people of the Buffalo, New York area. And thanks for your steadfast concern about the security of our country. I appreciate your service. I also appreciate the service of the really fine governor of the state of New York, George Pataki. Thanks for coming. I know we got state and local authorities who are here. I appreciate your service. For the local authorities, my only advice is to make sure you fill the potholes, empty the garbage, answer the phone calls. But thanks for coming today. This message today is aimed as much at you as it is anybody else. Today we have got a lot of families with us, but one that struck me as worthy of note, and that's the Conroy family. Where's Peggy Conroy? Somewhere. Well, there she is. Good. Hi, Peggy. Thanks. The reason I brought up Peggy is I want you to know that Peggy's husband is a staff sergeant, the National Guard, 105th Military Police Unit in Karbala, Iraq. She represents many of the families of this area and the country who are sacrificing to see to it that the world is more free and more peaceful. I appreciate so very much your steadfast love for your husband. You honor us with your presence today, and I'm really glad you brought Billy and Jeff and Tyler. Billy and Jeff really represent the greatest spirit of our country. Not only they love their dad and pray for their dad, but they're collecting school supplies for the Iraqi children. In other words, they're going to their own schoolmates and saying, how best can we not only help secure Iraq so it can become a free country, how best can we show the compassion of America? And I want to thank you guys for honoring your dad and honoring our country. I also met a fellow named Frank Brusino. Where are you, Frank? Frank, there he is. Frank's an interesting character. He is a retired brigadier general in the Army Reserves, a paratrooper, who is now very much involved with the Senior Corps, the Citizen Corps Council. In other words, their job is to help provide law enforcement with additional volunteers so law enforcement can better do its job. For the first responders who are here, I think you know the valuable addition that Citizen Corps Councils have made so you can do your work better. The reason I bring up Frank is, a lot of times they talk about the strength of America. What is being in our military. It's part of our strength, and we're going to keep the military strong, by the way, so the world will be more peaceful. They talk about the strength of our country and being the fact that we're a prosperous nation, and we need to make sure we continue to expand prosperity so people can find work. But the true strength of the country lies in the hearts and souls of our citizens. See, Frank represents the strength of America because he volunteers to make the community in which he lives a better place. He set such a great example for other citizens in this area. That's why I wanted to herald Frank's accomplishments. He is a soldier in the Army of Compassion. He takes time out of his life to see what he can do to make the Buffalo area more secure. My call to people in this area is see what you can do to make Buffalo a more compassionate, decent place. See societies change one conscience, one soul at a time. All it takes is for citizens to hear that universal call to love a neighbor just like you'd like to be loved yourself and mentor a child, or feed the hungry, or provide shelter for the homeless, or love the lonely. And by doing so, you serve our nation and you really show the world the true compassion of a great nation. Thank you for your service, sir. Proud of you here. Thanks for coming. September the 11th was a horrible day for our nation, and we must never forget the lessons of September the 11th. I appreciate so very much the governor's steadfast determination and compassion during those difficult times for the citizens of New York City and New York State and New Jersey and Connecticut. It's a time that really changed our perspective about the world. See, we never really thought America would be a battlefield. We thought oceans would protect us. That was kind of the conventional wisdom of the time, and therefore our defenses were aligned that way, our offenses were aligned that way. As Larry mentioned, there were threats, but most of the threats were overseas, and they attacked us overseas. But never did we dream that they would use our own airplanes as weapons to find, mercilessly kill thousands of our citizens. From that day forward, we have changed our attitude, and we got to make sure the laws reflect the realities of the generation, of the new generation, of the generation of those of us involved with being responsible for the security of the country. See, we're now facing the first war of the 21st century. It's a different kind of war. Frank was a paratrooper. In those days, you could measure the enemy by the number of battalions and number of tanks and number of airplanes. Now the enemy hides in caves. They lurch in the shadows of the world. They will strike and kill innocent citizens without any conscience because they have no conscience. So the fundamental charge before us all in positions of responsibility is how do we deal with the threat? First thing we do is we stay on the offense. First thing we do is we find killers before they kill us. We rally the world, which we have done and will continue to do, to cut off money, to share intelligence, to put brave troops and security personnel after these people, to find them, to rout them out. The message should be clear to them. There is no cave or hole deep enough to hide from the justice of the United States of America and our coalition partners. It's essential. September the 11th, when the president says something, he better mean it. See, in order to make the world more peaceful, it's essential that those of us in positions of high responsibility speak clearly and mean what we say. And so when I said if you harbor a terrorist, you're just as guilty as a terrorist, I meant it. And we acted upon that in order to make the world more peaceful and more secure. The Taliban found out what we meant. Remember, those were the leaders in Afghanistan that provided safe haven in training camps for al-Qaeda. And fortunately, thanks to our coalition, thanks to brave soldiers from America and others, the Taliban no longer is in power. We enforce the doctrine. The world is more peaceful because the Taliban is gone, and at the same time, please remember, the women and children in Afghanistan have a much brighter future because we removed a barbaric regime that refused to even educate young girls. When the president speaks, he better mean it. And when I went in front of the United Nations Security Council in the fall of 2002, I said, listen, we all have seen a threat. One of the lessons of September the 11th was when you see a threat overseas, you must act before it materializes. September the 11th said, we can't wait and hope on the good intentions of terrorists who will kill innocent men and women. We've got to act. We can't hope for the best anymore. The United States must use our prestige and influence and diplomatic power and military power to protect us and others who love freedom. I went in front of the United Nations Security Council having looked at intelligence that said Saddam Hussein was a threat. The Congress looked at the same intelligence, by the way, and concluded Saddam was a threat. The United Nations Security Council looked at the intelligence and said Saddam was a threat. No wonder we thought he was a threat. After all, he had used weapons of mass destruction on his own people. Not only did the intelligence lead us to believe that, but his actions led us to believe it. He paid for suiciders. He harbored terrorists. He was paying for terrorists to kill. And so we saw a threat. September the 11th changed the equation. So I was given a choice. Either trust the word of a madman, hope for the best with somebody who is a tyrant, or take actions to defend our country. Given that choice, I will defend America every time. It's hard work to go from a system where there was torture and rape rooms and mass graves to freedom. That's hard work. But it is necessary work. That's why I want to herald the work and sacrifice of your husband. It's important work for our future. Free societies are peaceful societies. The way to defeat terror in the long run is to provide hope. To provide hope for families, to provide hope for children, to say there is a bright future for you. That won't happen so long as there's tyranny in a part of the world that tends to breed hatred. It will happen when societies become democratic and free. And so what we're doing right now is we're defeating the enemy there so we won't have to fight him here. But as well, we're working for freedom in the heart of a part of the world that needs freedom. You know, I can't tell you how strongly I believe that about the power of freedom. After all, it's been a part of our national soul. We have proven how powerful freedom can be. We bring people from diverse backgrounds together under the mantle of a free society. We're such a beacon. I believe freedom is not America's gift to the world. I believe freedom is the Almighty God's gift to each man and woman in this world. And therefore, as we work to not only make the homeland more secure, we work to spread freedom, which will make the world more peaceful. The enemy can't stand the thought of free societies. That's why they attacked us. You see? We're not going to change. That's what they don't understand. There's nothing they can do to intimidate us, to make us change our deepest belief. They're trying to kill, to shake our will. We're too tough, too strong, too resolute, and too determined to ever have our will shaken by thugs and terrorists. We live in historic times. We face a different kind of war, and one of the key victories in this battle against terror is going to be the spread of freedom throughout the greater Middle East. And we'll succeed. We'll succeed because deep in the heart of every human being is the deep desire to be free. At home, we got a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do. We're a free nation. We're a big nation. People come and go. And we needed to change the whole attitude about how we protect the homeland. I mean, we'll do everything we can to stay on the offensive. But just remember, we got to be right 100% of the time, and the enemy's only got to be right once. And so we got a tough job. It means we've got to coordinate between the federal government and the state government and the local government like never before. We got to share information on a real-time basis so first responders and police chiefs can move as quickly as possible. We're going to talk about that communication today. We created the Department of Homeland Security, which would allow us to better coordinate between agencies. Kind of what happens in bureaucracies, you get what they call stovepipes. In other words, people don't talk to each other. They kind of stay in their own lane. And they don't share information across the lanes, and therefore vital information may show up, but it's not widely disseminated, so there's not real real-time action on, say, a threat. Part of the problem we faced was that there was laws and bureaucratic mindsets that prevented the sharing of information. And so besides setting up the Homeland Security Department and beefing up our air travel security and making sure that we now fingerprint at the borders and take those fingerprints, by the way, and compare them to a master log of fingerprints of terrorists and known criminals to make sure people coming in our country are the right people coming in our country. I mean, we're doing a lot of things. But we changed law as well to allow the FBI and to be able to share information within the FBI. Incredibly enough, because of which Larry and others will describe, see, I'm not a lawyer, so it's kind of hard for me to kind of get bogged down in the law. And I'm not going to play like one either. The way I viewed it, if I could just put it in simple terms, is that one part of the FBI couldn't tell the other part of the FBI vital information because of law. And the CIA and the FBI couldn't talk. Now, these are people charged with gathering information about threats to the country, yet they couldn't share the information. And right after September 11th, the Congress wisely acted and said, this doesn't make any sense. If we can't get people talking, how can we act? We're charged with the security of the country. First responders are charged with the security of the country. And if we can't share information between vital agencies, we're not going to be able to do our job. And they acted. So the first thing I want you to think about is when you hear Patriot Act, is that we changed the law and bureaucratic mindset to allow for the sharing of information. It's vital, and others will describe what that means. Secondly, there are such things as roving wiretaps. Now, by the way, anytime you hear the United States government talking about wiretap, a wiretap requires a court order. Nothing has changed, by the way. When we're talking about chasing down terrorists, we're talking about getting a court order before we do so. It's important for our fellow citizens to understand, when you think Patriot Act, constitutional guarantees are in place when it comes to doing what is necessary to protect our homeland because we value the Constitution. But a roving wiretap means, look, it was primarily used for drug lords. You know, a guy, pretty intelligent drug lord, would have a phone, and in old days they could just get a tap on that phone. So guess what he'd do? He'd get him another phone, particularly with the advent of the cell phones. And so he'd start changing cell phones, which made it hard for our DEA types to listen, to run down these guys polluting our streets. And that changed. The law changed. On roving wiretaps were available for chasing down drug lords. They weren't available for chasing down terrorists. See? And that didn't make any sense in the post-9/11 era. If we couldn't use a tool that we're using against mobsters on terrorists, something had needed to happen. The Patriot Act changed that. So with court order, law enforcement officials can now use what's called roving wiretaps, which will prevent a terrorist from switching cell phones in order to get a message out to one of his buddies. Thirdly, to give you an example of what we're talking about, there's something called delayed notification warrants. Those are very important. I see some people, first responders, nodding their heads about what they mean. These are a common tool used to catch mobsters. In other words, it allows people to collect data before everybody's aware of what's going on. It requires court order. It requires protection under the law. We couldn't use these against terrorists, but we could use against gangs. We had real problems chasing following paper trails of people. The law was just such that we could run down a problem for a crooked businessman. We couldn't use the same tools necessary to chase down a terrorist. That didn't make any sense. And sometimes the use of paper trails and paper will lead local first responders and local officials to a potential terrorist. We got to have every tool, is what I'm telling you, available for our people who I expect to do their jobs, and you expect to do their jobs. We had tough penalties for drug traffickers, but we didn't have as tough a penalty for terrorists. That didn't make any sense. The true threat to the 21st century is the fact somebody's trying to come back into our country and hurt us, and we ought to be able to at least send a signal through law says that we're going to treat you equally as tough as we do mobsters and drug lords. There's other things we need to do. We need administrative subpoenas in the law. This was not a part of the recent Patriot Act. By the way, the reason I'm bringing up the Patriot Act, it's set to expire next year. I'm starting a campaign to make it clear to members of Congress it shouldn't expire. It shouldn't expire for the security of our country. Administrative subpoenas means it speeds up the process whereby people can gain information to go after terrorists. Administrative subpoenas, I guess, is a kind of an ominous sounding word, but this was just to put everybody's mind at ease about administrative subpoenas. We use them to catch crooked doctors today. It's a tool for people to chase down medical fraud. And it certainly makes sense to me that if we're using it as a tool to chase medical fraud cases, we certainly ought to use it as a tool to chase potential terrorists. I'll tell you another interesting part of the law that needs to be changed. Judges need greater authority to deny bail to terrorists. Judges have that authority in many cases, like, again, I keep citing drug offenses, but Congress got tough on drug offenders a while ago and gave judges leeway to deny bail. They don't have that same authority to deny bail to terrorists now. I got to tell you, it doesn't make any sense to me that it is very conceivable that we haul in somebody who's dangerous to America and then they're able to spring bail and out they go. It's hard to assure the American people that we've given tools to law enforcement that they need if somebody has gone through all the work to chase down a potential terrorist and they haul them in front of a court and they pay bail and it's adios. This doesn't make any sense. The Patriot Act needs to be renewed and the Patriot Act needs to be enhanced. That's what we're talking about. And it's better for others to explain to you how this Patriot Act works. After all, they're charged with protecting our citizens. They're on the front line. You see, I try to pick the best I can at the federal government and say, here's our mission. Our mission is to protect our country. I say that to the Defense Department. Our mission is to protect the country. I say it to the Justice Department and to the FBI. After 9/11, I said to the Justice Department and the FBI, your job, your primary focus now is to prevent attack. Listen, I still want you chasing down the criminals. That's what's expected of you. But there's a new mindset, and that is because of what happened on 9/11, we got to change the way we think. And therefore, your job now is to prevent attack. And one of the first persons I told that to was Thompson. See, when they say Deputy Attorney General, it means he's the number 2 guy at the Justice Department. He was the chief operating officer of the Justice Department. He was there when he heard the command given that we're at war. I want everybody at home doing everything we can to protect us. And your job now is to prevent. Do what you can do. And so, Larry, we miss you over there. And don't get too comfortable. He's living in Atlanta. He's living in Atlanta. George Ashley, when he left, he said, you know, I've got some kids to raise. I love that spirit, by the way. I love the fact that a dad puts his family first. And that's a vital part of life, isn't it? And so he did a heck of a good job. And he's also doing a very good job as his most important responsibility, which is being a loving dad. But I appreciate you coming up. Why don't you just say what you want to say now that you're no longer in government?
Well, my mother didn't raise a fool, Mr. President. Thank you. As the President said, after those horrific attacks of 9/11, we in law enforcement, and I mean federal, state, and local law enforcement, we realized that we needed to do a more aggressive job in protecting our fellow citizens. But we also, because we were in law enforcement, we also knew that we had to be careful and methodical about what we were going to do. And we had to undertake our law enforcement efforts in a way that's consistent with the values of this great nation, and undertake our law enforcement efforts inside, not outside, our Constitution. But we also understood, and with the direction from the President, we also understood that we had to adapt. The bad people the people who were trying to kill you and I are smart, and we had to improve our capabilities if we were going to do what we were charged in doing, and that is preserve the public safety. So I'm going to turn to your United States Attorney, because the President mentioned the Patriot Act, and he mentioned a provision of the Patriot Act, and I'm a lawyer, I'm going to give you the number. It's Section 218, and that provision is scheduled to sunset as of December 31, 2005. It will no longer be in effect. And that provision has allowed the intelligence side of the FBI to talk to the criminal side of the FBI. It has allowed the FBI intelligence agents to talk to our prosecutors, and that provision was very instrumental in an important law enforcement case in this district. So I'm going to turn to United States Attorney Battle, and if you can tell us how the provisions of the Patriot Act help you and some of the work that important and good work that you've done in Buffalo, I would appreciate it. Michael?
Thank you, Larry. And thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, as many of you in the audience know, in June of 2001, the FBI received an anonymous letter that identified several individuals of being involved in what we call normal criminal activity, but also for the first time being involved with possible terrorist activity both in the United States and abroad. This was several months before September 11, 2001. Subsequent to September 11, 2001, the Patriot Act was proposed and it was passed. But our investigation was ongoing at that time. The letter generated two parallel but non-intersecting investigations in the local FBI office. And what that meant was, because of the prevailing law at that time, in the building that housed all of the FBI agents in downtown Buffalo, these individuals who often go to lunch together, pass one another in the hallway, on the criminal side, investigating the same individuals as those on the intelligence side, could not talk to each other about the case.
Let me stop you right there. I hope the average citizen sees the dilemma. You got people working on, the criminal case moving along, and they say, we got a problem with these guys, and all of a sudden, the other side of the building says, they may be involved with a plot related to terrorism, and yet they can't talk? Go ahead. Well, they could talk about Buffalo Bills football, but they couldn't talk about securing the homeland.
I couldn't have said it better myself. But, Mr. President, needless to say, when you have an investigation that started with an anonymous tip, that in and of itself is a challenge.
Yeah.
But to then not be able to move off the dime by sharing information about the same individuals who are being investigated, that creates an additional dilemma. Almost 1 year later, after the passing of the Patriot Act, we learned for the first time that those same law enforcement officers could now talk to each other. But at that point, the investigation had not moved that far forward. But the benefit of the Patriot Act was now allowing these agents and officers to talk to each other and also know that they could talk to their state and local partners and their counterparts in the CIA, now had the kind of information to go forward and to seek one of the most prolific tools that we have in our arsenal, and that is the wiretap provisions, to go out and find out what these individuals were doing. That in and of itself accelerated the investigation because we had a lot more information than we ever would have had we continued on the parallel non-intersecting tracks, and to date this investigation might still be going on. So for a case that didn't move off the dime for 1 year, when we learned in May of 2002 that we could share information, within 5 months we were able to gather enough information to bring charges against these defendants, and they were arrested and brought before the court in September of 2002. That was a major benefit for us.
Yeah, let me ask you something, Mike. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
We put you in there because we want you to get them and lock them up if they're harmful to America. But let me ask you something. Talk about the Did a good job. And we're about to go to Pete Ahern of the FBI, but I want to ask you a question on the bail proceedings. Do you have any thoughts? I mean, it's kind of a leading question, of course. Not even a lawyer. Anyway, tell me about the bail proceedings with those that you arrested.
Absolutely. Mr. President, I was a drug prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office back in the late 80s and early 90s, so I knew about the provision in law that allowed us to bring a drug defendant before the court for the first appearance and ask for that they be held on detention. And that law was there to take dangerous people off the street. As you said earlier, we did not have that in relation to the now 6 terrorists that we had, or alleged terrorists that we had in custody before the court. And we ended up in a hearing that lasted for almost 2 weeks, and even though the defendants were held during that time, but we didn't know what the final result was going to be. And there was no presumption of detention that the judge could turn to that would assist us in making sure that these defendants would not be released.
Michael, could you just explain to the audience and to the President what a strategic disadvantage that put you and your prosecutors at in terms of the evidence that you had to present at that hearing?
Absolutely, and many of the people in this audience might remember it because it took so long. And if we would have had a situation where there was a presumption of detention, we would have to present a little bit of information to the court about why we think these individuals should have been held. Because we didn't have that presumption, we had to almost show our entire case to the court and to the community to justify that they be detained. That put us in a definite strategic disadvantage as trial attorneys, because in the future the defense might know our whole case. The public might also learn, and other potential terrorists might learn about the intelligence that we had that would have made it difficult for us to present another act or something else, because our investigation was ongoing then, and even today it is an ongoing investigation.
I appreciate you, Mike. Good job.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Pete Ahern's with us with the FBI. Pete, why don't you share with us, like, what it was like not to talk to somebody? No.
Well,
let me say something about the FBI. Pete's boss is Bob Mueller. He's now the director of the FBI. Mueller's doing a fabulous job. He comes to my office nearly every morning. He sits down and brings me up to date on what the FBI is doing. What's really interesting is to follow some of the cases. We followed this case to see how hard our agents are working, how close the coordination is, and I really want to thank you for being on the front line of doing really incredibly important work to protect the American people.
The law, the Patriot Act, has the judicial oversight. The rules are there. We follow the rules. The last time I checked, the terrorists don't have the rules that we have and don't have to play by them. So when you're dealing with a situation like this and you have all the pieces of the puzzle and parts of the puzzle in one room, parts in another, we were at the time probably one of the first FBI offices applying the new Patriot Act during the outset of this investigation. The other issue, the information that we received, and it wasn't just issues with the 6 individuals in Lackawanna, it is the information we were able to glean that we were able to pass to our counterparts, for example, in the CIA. It did not just deal with here. It was incumbent on us to take that information and everything we had, not just maybe some phone numbers that we got from the criminal side of the case or phone numbers that we got from the intelligence side of the case. Even after the Lackawanna case, the Patriot Act provisions helped us. We were able to share the intelligence from the proffers, intelligence from the grand jury, the information that we had there, and pass it to the intel community. That led to many other things that were part of this investigation that were overseas. So it was not just a cell right here.
Right. Some of the people in the cell here actually were traveling overseas, as I recall.
Oh,
Matter of fact, we got a couple of them overseas. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir. Yes, we did.
Maybe I'm not supposed to say that.
Well, as far as I'm concerned, Mr. President.
Thank you, Attorney. He said I didn't break any rules. The point is that what he's telling you is that we need to share this information throughout our government, which we couldn't do before. And it just doesn't make any sense. We got people working hard overseas that are collecting information to better help us protect ourselves. And what 9/11 was that said is that a threat overseas now must be taken seriously here at home. It's one thing to protect our embassies, and we work hard to do so. But now a threat overseas could end up being a threat to the homeland. And in order to protect the homeland, these good people have got to be able to share information. Those who criticize the Patriot Act must listen to those folks on the front line of defending America. The Patriot Act defends our liberty, is what it does, under the Constitution of the United States. Go ahead.
Prior to the Patriot Act, it is true, and no pun intended, but we were fighting with one arm tied behind our back. It was clear.
Yeah. Looks like you still are.
So again, it was very beneficial on that, and that information, you walk into the FBI office here, Mr. President, you cannot tell the difference between an FBI agent, a BICE agent, a Niagara Falls Police Department officer, a sheriff, or anybody, because they're cleared, they see everything we say, they're assigned cases. We've even sent some down to do the debriefings of individuals in Gitmo, and that's what it brings to the table, and a lot of this indirectly with the Patriot Act.
Yeah, Peter. Joint Terrorism Task Force, might tell the folks what that means?
Well, clearly, the JTTF is an acronym, obviously, for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. Prior to 9/11, there were about 28 of them in the United States. We here in Buffalo had already established and put the paperwork in for one prior to 9/11. It was the first one approved, and it brings to the table more resources that I can, as the FBI director here, to put into the battle and the war on terrorism.
And who sits around the table? Joint Terrorism Task Force, FBI agents, U.S. attorneys, local?
Well, I'm sure you're going to hear more about that with the gentleman here, but
good.
they all sit around
That's what
the
I'm
table.
leading into. See,
No,
it's kind of
it's a good segue. There are no secrets. I mean, everybody that is cleared and is part of the investigation, they see it all.
Right. This is a good segue, as we say, to federal, state, and local cooperation. It is, in order for us to do our jobs, we got to make sure that the federal government shares information with the state government and vice versa, and that the state and federal government share information with the local government, vice versa, so that everybody is knitted up, as we say. And that wasn't the case before September the 11th in a lot of communities. One of the knitter-uppers is Jim McMahon, who appointed by the governor. I appreciate your service. Let her go.
Thanks, Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just talk from a state perspective of your standing about we are, as Peter said, true partners now in this war on terror. And if we are going to prevent, which you indicate all the time we need to do, our governor said the same thing, that means that you've got to use state and local law enforcement. 70,000 strong, you see a lot of these men and women dedicated out here in New York State. They're our foot soldiers. Prior to 9/11, we didn't have the information. The Patriot Act, with the federal agencies being able to share information, as you just detailed and Peter did, that information now is getting down to us. And how do we get that to the local level? Governor Pataki created a counterterrorism zone situation, geographic areas of state and local law enforcement in New York State, and provided us a standalone computer system for all police departments. We take that information and we get that information on a timely basis down to those road patrols, sheriff's deputies, troopers, patrolmen and women, and they can take that information, look for indicators, look for warnings in their communities, and be able to get information back up to our federal counterparts. It's working.
Well, I appreciate that. It's what dawned on me when Jim was talking is that we do the same thing, by the way, for federal emergency response. We've done a better job of coordinating FEMA, for example, which is means Federal Emergency Management Association, but it's now part of the Homeland Security Department, and we better coordinate with state and local authorities. So not only are we doing coordinating activities when it comes to fighting terrorists, but we're doing so when it comes to responding to emergencies as well. I appreciate the first responders who are here. I know New York has got fantastic first responders. Obviously, those who rushed into burning towers, set the highest of high standards for courage and bravery, and really served as great inspiration for others who wear the uniform, as well as those of us who appreciate those who wear the uniform. Speaking about wearing a uniform, one man wore one today, and that would be Chief Moslow. Thank you for coming, sir. Honored you're here.
Thank you, Mr. President. Prior to September 11th, local law enforcement virtually had nothing to do with international terrorism. We had the mindset that that's handled by the CIA, by the James Bond types of the world, and obviously we found out that's not the case any longer. We're fast learners. I believe New York State is ahead of the curve, thanks to Governor Pataki and Director McMahon, and we took a crash course. We now receive an unprecedented amount of intelligence information from the FBI and from the State Department of Homeland Security. Just last week, we received a intelligence bulletin that probably 4 or 5 years ago we really wouldn't have paid much attention to, but now we found out that thousands of numbered French passports were stolen in France. That could very easily happen, that those passports show up in New York City or the town of Amherst or the city of Buffalo. And that information, with the systems that Director McMahon has explained, now has the ability to reach our officers, their in-car computers, that if they stop an individual that has a French passport, it gives them reasonable cause to believe that I better look a little bit further. And maybe I should call the JTTF and find out if we need to detain this individual, possibly a terrorist. And I think we're working well at it, and I think we are, as Director McMahon had explained, full partners with the federal and state government. I think we're an awesome force when we all work together. 70,000 trained eyes and ears on the road, keeping an eye on our communities.
Yeah, that's good. See, Thompson whispered, he said, we've only got 13,000 FBI agents. That is, when you think about it, put that like across the country, it's not a lot of FBI agents, is it? So therefore, there needs to be cooperation. And I appreciate you, Chief. You represent those on the front lines, what we call the first responders. The federal government is spending some money to help, and the key is to make sure we get it to you so it doesn't get stuck in different bureaucracies, which is one of the challenges those of us in government face, which is not getting stuck in bureaucracies. But I want to thank you, and I want to thank the men and women from this area who are on the front lines for doing everything in your power to uphold the oath to which you swore when you became a uniformed officer. Here's what I think. I think that the world is going to be more peaceful and free. I think America is now more secure, and we're working to make it even more secure. There is no doubt in my mind that this country cannot achieve any objective we put our mind to. It's essential we remain steadfast and strong and courageous and determined. History has called us to this moment of time, and history has called the right nation to lead. And the reason I can say that with certainty is because I understand the character and the courage of the American people. It's an honor to have been here today. I hope as a result of this discussion, our fellow citizens have a better understanding of the importance of the Patriot Act and why it needs to be renewed and expanded, the importance of the Patriot Act when it comes to defending America, our liberties, and at the same time that it still protects our liberties under the Constitution. But more importantly, I hope our fellow citizens recognize that there are hundreds of their fellow citizens working on a daily basis to do their duty to make this country as secure as possible. And for your work, I say thank you, and may God continue to bless you. Thank you for coming.